Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
Late one evening, a young woman named Emily was finishing up her shift at a small 24-hour supermarket in a quiet suburban neighborhood. She had always worked the late shifts, taking solace in the calm and emptiness of the store after the hustle and bustle of the day. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the constant hum of the refrigerators filled the otherwise eerie silence. It was nearing closing time, and only a few customers remained, each lost in their own world as they meandered through the aisles, picking up last-minute items. Emily was tired but looking forward to going home, her mind already drifting to the comfort of her bed. She noticed a man wandering the aisles, his movements strange, slow, deliberate, and almost unnatural. He wore a long, dark coat despite the warm weather, his face obscured by a hood. Emily didn't think much of it, as the late-night crowd often consisted of odd characters, but something about him felt off. He didn't seem to pick up anything, just aimlessly walking from one end of the store to the other. She decided to keep an eye on him, just in case, though her instincts told her it was probably nothing. But then when Emily walked past the aisle where the man had been, she was shocked to find it completely empty. There was no sign of him anywhere. The doors to the stockroom were shut, and the store was quiet again. Too quiet. A cold shiver crept down her spine as she glanced around the aisles. She had the strange, nagging feeling that someone was watching her. She tried to shake it off, thinking maybe it was just the exhaustion playing tricks on her mind, but the feeling wouldn't go away. After a few minutes, Emily noticed the man again, standing at the back of the store near the frozen food section. He wasn't looking at anything on the shelves. He was just standing there, staring straight ahead, unmoving. His back was turned to her, but she could see that he wasn't holding anything, wasn't making a sound. She decided to approach him, hoping to ask if he needed help finding something. As she got closer, her steps faltered. He hadn't moved at all. His hooded head was slightly tilted forward, as if he were listening for something. Emily cleared her throat softly, trying to break the strange tension. "Excuse me, sir," she said. "Can I help you with anything?" The man didn't respond. He just stood there. Emily felt a growing unease in the pit of her stomach. She took another step forward, closer, almost too close now. But before she could reach out to tap him on the shoulder, a loud crash echoed from the front of the store, making her jump. She spun around instinctively, her heart racing. When she turned back, the man was gone, completely gone. There was no sign of him, not a single trace. The aisle where he had been standing was completely empty, and the frozen food section was untouched. Her pulse quickened as she looked around, her eyes darting from one end of the store to the other. Trying to convince herself it was just her imagination running wild, Emily grabbed her radio to check in with her supervisor. No answer. She tried again, more urgently, but the static from the radio buzzed back at her, empty and hollow. She could feel the tension rising in her chest, her breath quickening. Then the doors of the supermarket, normally locked tight and secured during the night, slammed open with a violent bang. Emily froze. A gust of cold wind rushed in, and with it, the smell of something awful, something rotten. She felt her throat tighten as the foul odor filled her nostrils. The hairs on her arms stood up, and a chill spread across her body. Her heart began to pound in her chest as the lights above flickered. And then, as if pulled by some unseen force, Emily's gaze was drawn to the back of the store once more. The man was standing there again, this time much closer, right at the end of the aisle, his hooded face now visible. His eyes were wide open, dark circles under them, his mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. But what froze her in place was the strange, unnatural stillness of his entire being. His mouth was moving, as though he was speaking, but there was no sound, just that horrific grin. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the intercom system, loud and distorted. "Help! Me!" It was her supervisor's voice, but it sounded wrong. It was like it came from the depths of a cave, muffled and distorted beyond recognition. Terrified, Emily turned and fled toward the emergency exit. The door swung open as she pushed against it with all her strength, but it wouldn't budge. Something was blocking it from the other side. The man was there, right behind her. His cold breath was now on her neck, his footsteps coming closer and closer, the smell of decay overpowering. With a final scream, Emily turned to face him, but when she did, she found nothing. No man, no strange figure. The supermarket was once again eerily silent, just the empty shelves and flickering lights. When the police arrived hours later, they found Emily standing outside, shivering in terror, her eyes wide with fear. The doors to the supermarket were locked tight, but when they managed to get inside, the store was completely undisturbed. Nothing out of place, no sign of any man, no trace of anything strange. But Emily knew the truth, and when she left the police station, she never went back to that supermarket again. Every night, in the silence of her room, she could still hear that man's voice on the intercom. "Help me."
Story number 2.
A couple, Jason and Maria, decided to take a quiet weekend getaway to a remote cabin deep in the woods. The cabin was a rustic retreat, far from the noise of city life, a place where they could relax and enjoy nature. Jason had found it online, a small, secluded property that was incredibly cheap for the weekend. The owner's reviews were mostly positive, with only a few cryptic comments that Maria had dismissed as exaggerations. When they arrived, everything seemed perfect. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow across the dense forest, and the cabin itself looked cozy. It had been recently renovated with all the modern comforts, yet it retained a charming old-world feel. They unloaded their bags, unpacked their things, and settled in for a night of peace and quiet. As night fell, they lit a fire in the fireplace and opened a bottle of wine. Everything was going smoothly, and the isolation seemed like the perfect antidote to their busy lives. After a while, though, Maria noticed something strange. The woods outside were unnervingly silent. There were no animals, no rustling of leaves, no wind even. Just an oppressive stillness that made her feel uneasy. Jason reassured her that it was normal, that the quiet was part of the charm of being out in the middle of nowhere. But as the night wore on, the silence grew heavier, almost suffocating. They sat in front of the fire, talking and laughing, trying to shake off the growing sense of discomfort. That's when they heard it, the faintest sound, a soft tapping. At first, they thought it was the wind tapping against the cabin's wooden walls, but then the sound became rhythmic, purposeful. It came from the direction of the back door. Jason, ever the skeptic, stood up to investigate. He checked the windows and the back door, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. He even stepped outside for a moment, scanning the perimeter with his flashlight. The forest was empty, the darkness swallowing everything in its path. No animals, no movement, just the relentless, oppressive quiet. When he returned inside, he tried to reassure Maria again, but the tapping continued. Now, it wasn't just on the back door. It was coming from the walls, the windows, and even the floorboards. The couple froze, eyes wide with terror. Maria's heart raced as she clutched Jason's arm. "Maybe it's just an animal," Jason suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. He grabbed the flashlight again and checked the area outside the cabin once more. Nothing. As the hours passed, the tapping grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't random anymore. It was like someone was trying to get inside. And then, in the dead of night, a loud bang came from the back door, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone or something dragging its feet across the porch. Maria whispered, "Jason, did you lock the back door?" Jason's stomach dropped. They'd both assumed it was locked, but now they weren't so sure. With a shaky breath, he moved cautiously toward the door, but as he reached for the handle, the door flew open violently, as though something had forced it from the other side. Standing in the doorway was a tall figure, completely shrouded in darkness. At first, Jason thought it was another person, perhaps a fellow traveler lost in the woods, but then he noticed the strange details. The figure's face was obscured, not by a mask, but by a layer of thick, matted hair, dark and wild, clinging to its skin like it hadn't seen sunlight in years. Its eyes were wide, bloodshot, and unblinking. But most chilling of all was its slow, deliberate breathing, ragged and uneven, as though it had been waiting for them to open the door for years. "Who are you?" Jason called out, his voice trembling, but the figure didn't answer. It just stood there, breathing heavily, unmoving. Suddenly, it stepped forward, its hands outstretched, fingers curled like claws. Without thinking, Jason slammed the door shut, locking it with all his strength. Maria screamed as the sound of scraping against the wood echoed from the outside. The figure didn't leave. It didn't even make a sound anymore. It just stood there, watching them. Jason and Maria huddled together, trying to call for help, but there was no cell signal, no way to reach anyone. The tapping continued, relentless and maddening. But now, there was something else. From the other side of the cabin, something was whispering. Low, guttural whispers, indecipherable and haunting, came from the walls themselves. Maria could feel them seeping into her mind. Desperate to escape, they grabbed their things and bolted from the cabin, running into the dark woods, not daring to look back. The figure's presence, the scraping sounds, and the whispers followed them, as though the forest itself was alive, watching and waiting. They didn't stop running until they reached the main road several miles away. They managed to flag down a car and get a ride to the nearest town, but when they tried to explain what happened, no one believed them. The sheriff assured them it was probably just an animal, but Jason and Maria knew better. They never returned to that cabin, and when they checked online months later, the listing had been taken down. There was no record of the cabin's owner, just a single review left by someone named AM, which read, "I wouldn't stay here if I were you. There's something in the woods. It waits." Some things are better left unknown.
Story number 3.
It was late autumn, and the streets of the small town where Sarah lived were eerily empty, the trees shedding their final leaves in the chilling breeze. She had always been drawn to the old cemetery on the outskirts of town, a place that no one seemed to visit anymore. There were rumors that it was haunted, that strange things happened there after dark, but Sarah never believed in ghosts. She considered it all to be local superstition, nothing more. One evening, with the wind howling and the full moon hanging low in the sky, Sarah decided to visit the cemetery. She had passed by it countless times, but never actually ventured inside. The iron gates creaked as she pushed them open, and a strange sense of foreboding washed over her, but she ignored it, brushing it off as the cold night air. The cemetery was overgrown with ivy, and the gravestones were tilted and cracked. The shadows of the trees seemed to stretch far longer than they should, casting eerie shapes across the ground. It was unsettling, but Sarah felt an odd pull to explore. She wandered deeper into the cemetery, brushing past the decaying tombstones and gravestones of people who had been forgotten by time. As she wandered further, something caught her eye, a small, isolated gravestone at the far end of the cemetery. Unlike the others, this one was well maintained. The name on it was unfamiliar, Eleanor Finch, and the dates of birth and death were oddly recent. What stood out the most, though, was the strange inscription beneath the name. She was taken before her time, but her journey continues still. Intrigued, Sarah knelt down and ran her fingers across the stone, feeling an inexplicable chill crawl up her spine. The air around her seemed to grow colder, and she shivered, but before she could pull her hand away, she heard it, a faint whisper, like a voice carried by the wind. "Leave now." Sarah jerked her hand back, heart pounding in her chest. Her eyes darted around, but the cemetery was still empty. She dismissed it as the wind, trying to calm herself, but her instincts told her something was terribly wrong. The whisper came again, louder this time, almost a growl. "Leave now, before it comes." Sarah's feet moved of their own accord, taking her back toward the gates. Her pulse quickened, but when she turned to look behind her, there was no one there. Yet the feeling of being watched, of something moving in the shadows, was palpable. She was nearly at the gates when she heard footsteps behind her, slow and deliberate. She spun around, but there was no one there. Suddenly, a cold gust of wind swept through the cemetery, and with it came the unmistakable sound of whispering voices, many of them now. They were indistinct, too quiet to make out, but the tone was unmistakable, demanding, pleading. Sarah could feel her breath quicken, her skin crawling with unease. And then, as though summoned by the whispers, the ground beneath her feet shifted. The tombstones seemed to lean forward, tilting at unnatural angles, casting long, menacing shadows. Sarah took a step back, her heart racing, but the ground beneath her feet seemed to sink slightly, as though something was pushing up from beneath the earth. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw something, a shape, a figure, tall and thin, with long flowing hair that billowed in the wind like smoke. It moved between the gravestones, its form flickering in and out of the shadows. Her body froze, her instincts screaming at her to run, but she couldn't move. The figure drew closer, its face hidden in the darkness of its hair, but Sarah could see its hands, long and bony, reaching toward her. The whispers grew louder, now almost frantic, a chorus of voices crying out, "She is waking! She will not let you go!" Just as the figure reached out to touch her, the ground trembled and the moonlight flickered. Sarah was jolted out of her paralysis, and instinctively, she turned and bolted toward the gates. Her breath was ragged, her legs aching as she ran, but the whispering followed her, growing louder and more desperate. When she reached the gates, they were shut tight. Sarah pulled desperately at the bars, but they didn't budge. The figure was closing in, its dark, hollow eyes now visible, staring at her with an intensity that froze her in place. But just as it reached for her, the gates suddenly swung open with a loud creak, and Sarah stumbled out into the street, gasping for air. The cemetery was silent again, the whispers gone, the figure vanished. The moon hung high above her, and the wind had died down, leaving only the faint rustle of the trees behind her. She looked back once more, half expecting to see the figure standing at the gates, watching her. But there was nothing, just the cemetery, still and empty. The next day, Sarah returned to the cemetery, though a sense of dread clung to her like a second skin. She went straight to Eleanor Finch's grave, expecting to find it the same as before, but when she looked at the gravestone, she gasped. The name Eleanor Finch was gone. In its place was a new inscription. She took the path, but she was lost to the shadows. You too will be taken. And beneath the stone, buried in the soft earth, Sarah noticed something horrifying, freshly disturbed soil, as if something had recently risen from the grave. She left the cemetery in a panic, vowing never to return, but as she walked away, she felt a cold, clammy hand brush against her shoulder. She didn't turn around. She knew it was already too late. The whispers had followed her, and they always would.
Story number 4.
Ethan had always been fascinated by abandoned places. There was something about their decay and solitude that stirred something inside him, a sense of eerie curiosity. So when he heard about the old mental asylum on the edge of town, long forgotten and abandoned since the 1950s, it seemed like the perfect place for an afternoon exploration. The building was vast, looming against the gray sky, with broken windows, rusted gates, and an air of neglect. It was said that the asylum had a dark history, filled with stories of cruel treatments and mysterious disappearances. But Ethan was not one to believe in ghost stories. He had heard whispers from locals, warnings to stay away, but he brushed them off as nothing more than exaggerated tales meant to scare off thrill-seekers like him. On a chilly autumn afternoon, he grabbed his flashlight and headed out to the asylum, his heart pounding in excitement and a little bit of nervousness. As he approached, the building seemed even more massive up close, its dark, decaying structure towering over him like something out of a nightmare. He pushed open the rusted gates with a creak and walked along the cracked path leading up to the entrance. The air inside was thick with dust and decay, the walls cracked and peeling from years of neglect. His flashlight beam danced across the abandoned hallways, revealing old, rusted equipment, broken furniture, and faded medical charts pinned to the walls. He walked through the corridors, each step echoing through the silence, but something felt wrong. The deeper he went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It was as if the building itself was alive, watching him. He passed through what seemed to be the old treatment rooms, rooms that smelled faintly of antiseptic and stale air. In one of the rooms, he found an old chair strapped to the floor, with leather restraints still attached. It was hard to imagine what kind of horrors had taken place in this building, but he couldn't help but feel that he wasn't alone. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from somewhere deeper in the asylum. Ethan froze, his heart skipping a beat. His first thought was that it was another explorer, someone else in the building with him. But when he listened closer, there was no movement, no sound following the crash. He told himself it was just his imagination and pressed on. As he ventured further, the hallways began to narrow, the temperature dropping. His breath came out in visible puffs. It was unnervingly cold now. The air felt thick, heavy, as though something was pressing down on him. The silence was broken by the sound of faint whispers, low, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to come from all around him. Ethan stopped dead in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. He spun around, shining his flashlight in every direction. The whispers grew louder, almost frantic, as if they were closing in on him. "Leave! Now!" The voice came from behind him, so close it sent a jolt of panic through his body. He whipped around, his flashlight beam catching the dark shadows of the hallway. But there was no one there. His heartbeat thundered in his chest. This wasn't just the wind. This wasn't just his mind playing tricks. Someone was in the asylum with him. He wasn't alone. He turned to leave, but as he did, a cold gust of air slammed the door behind him with a deafening bang. The walls shook. The temperature dropped even further, and the whispers turned into cries. Agonized, desperate, almost pleading. Ethan's legs moved on their own accord as he sprinted down the hallway, desperately trying to find an exit. But the deeper he ran, the more twisted the layout of the asylum seemed. The hallways stretched out endlessly, looping back on themselves. Every door he opened led to another dark, empty room, each one feeling more oppressive than the last. And then, as he turned a corner, his flashlight flickered and went out. He cursed under his breath, fumbling for new batteries, but when the light finally flickered back on, he saw it. At the end of the hall, standing motionless, was a figure, a woman in a long, tattered hospital gown. Her hair hung in greasy, tangled strands around her face, obscuring her features. She was completely still, except for the faintest sway, as if she were gently rocking back and forth. Ethan's heart pounded. He couldn't move. His breath caught in his throat as the figure slowly lifted her head, revealing pale, sunken eyes that glinted with something unnatural. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Instead, an eerie, inhuman hiss filled the air, so loud that it vibrated through the walls. And then she started to move. Slowly at first, but then faster, her feet dragging across the floor with a sound that made Ethan's skin crawl. Her body contorted unnaturally as she lunged toward him, the hiss growing louder, more frantic. Her hands reached for him, long, gnarled fingers stretching toward his face. Ethan screamed and turned, running as fast as he could. His footsteps echoed down the hall, the sound of her pursuit right behind him. He couldn't look back. He didn't dare. Finally, he burst through a door, stumbling out into the open. The sun had long since set, and the moonlight bathed the asylum in an eerie glow. He ran toward the gate, not daring to stop, the sound of her wailing cries echoing in his ears. When he reached the gate, he didn't look back. He didn't stop until he was safely home, out of breath and shaking. The next morning, Ethan returned to the asylum, desperate to prove to himself that it had all been some sort of hallucination. But when he got there, the building was locked up tight. The gates were rusted shut, and the windows were covered in grime. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get inside. The rumors about the asylum lingered in his mind. The patients, the disappearances, the ones who had been forgotten by time. And then one evening, as he was walking past the site of the asylum, he saw something strange. There, in the window on the top floor, was the woman, the figure in the hospital gown. Her hollow eyes stared out at him, unmoving, as though she had been waiting for him all along. From that moment on, Ethan knew he was never truly alone.
Story number 5.
There was a small 24-hour convenience store just off the interstate. Nothing fancy, just a lonely pit stop for truckers, insomniacs, and late-night wanderers. Most people didn't even know it existed, and those who did rarely went there more than once. Not because of the prices or the service, but because something about it just didn't feel right. Lena had just started working the night shift. She was new to town and needed a job, and the listing was vague. Overnight clerk, quiet, minimal tasks, $20 per hour. That kind of pay for stocking shelves and ringing up the occasional customer seemed too good to pass up. Her first night started uneventfully. The store was clean but outdated, with flickering fluorescent lights and an old security monitor in the back showing grainy black and white feeds from 4 cameras. The manager, an older man named Daryl, gave her a rundown. Just make sure no one steals anything. Don't go out back. Don't answer the payphone. If anyone comes in between 3 and 4 a.m., just let them be. Don't talk. Don't ask questions. Lena thought he was joking at first, but Daryl's face was deadly serious. I'm not messing with you, he said quietly. We don't ask what they are. We just keep the lights on and stay behind the counter. You'll be fine if you follow the rules." That night, the store was mostly quiet. A few people wandered in. A tired-looking trucker, a woman who bought nothing but a lighter and stood outside smoking for nearly an hour, a man who never spoke and stared at Lena with unblinking eyes as he paid for a single bottle of water. Creepy, sure, but nothing she couldn't handle. Then, around 2:58 a.m., the temperature in the store dropped noticeably. The buzzing of the overhead lights faltered. The camera started glitching, flashing static for a few seconds before returning. Lena glanced at the clock. 3 a.m. Right on cue, the bell above the door chimed. A man walked in, or what looked like a man. He was tall, dressed in a black suit that didn't seem to fit right, like it was stretched over something too long, too thin. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes were entirely black. No whites, no irises, just endless voids. Behind him, 2 others followed, one dragging its leg, the bones bending the wrong way under its weight, and another whose face was blurred, like someone had smeared it across a photograph. They didn't say anything. They didn't buy anything. They just walked the aisles in perfect silence. Lena didn't move. She remembered Daryl's warning, "Don't talk, don't ask questions." So she kept her eyes on the counter, forcing herself not to look directly at them as they passed. The thing with the blurred face stopped right in front of her. She could feel it watching her, even without eyes. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure it would burst through her chest. It stood there for a full minute, maybe longer, unmoving. Then it spoke, not aloud, but inside her head. "You see too much." Her breath hitched. Her legs trembled. She wanted to scream, to run, to call someone, but she couldn't move. It was like her body no longer belonged to her. The creature moved on, joining the other 2. Together, they walked to the far end of the store and disappeared. Just vanished, like they'd never been there. No door opened. No chime rang. They simply weren't there anymore. At exactly 4 a.m., the light stopped flickering. The temperature returned to normal. The camera stabilized. Lena sat behind the counter until sunrise, unable to move, barely able to think. When Daryl returned for the morning shift, he looked at her with knowing eyes. "They came in again, didn't they?" he asked, his voice low. Lena just nodded. "You gonna quit?" he asked. She didn't answer at first, but then, quietly, she said no, because something inside her had changed. And when she looked at the monitor, she saw something she hadn't seen before, a 5th camera feed. One she hadn't noticed the night before. It was labeled basement. Only there was no basement, not one she knew of. And on the screen in that dark room with no door, something was watching the monitor back.
Story number 6.
There was a supermarket on the edge of a quiet suburb, one of those places that felt like it had existed forever. No matter how much the town changed, Garrison's Market stayed exactly the same. Same dusty signs, same flickering fluorescent lights, same half-functioning freezers humming like they were alive. Most people only shopped there out of habit or desperation, when every other store was closed, or when they needed something in the dead of night. Derek had just taken a night stalker job there. He was in college, needed extra cash, and didn't mind working when everyone else was asleep. The first few nights were normal enough. The aisles were quiet, the work was monotonous, just organizing shelves, dealing with expired cans, avoiding the weird smell that came from aisle 9. But by the 5th night, things started to feel off. It began with the lights. Around 2 a.m., the lights in the produce section would flicker, not like a loose bulb, but like a heartbeat. Rhythmic, slow, pulsing. Then came the hum from the meat coolers. It would deepen into something guttural, like a growl hidden beneath the mechanical whir. Derek asked one of the older employees, Carla, about it. She paused for a long moment and then just said, "Don't go into the walk-in freezer after midnight. If you hear someone knocking from inside, ignore it, no matter what." He thought she was joking. She wasn't smiling. That same night, around 2:30 a.m., Derek was near the back of the store when he heard it. A knock. 3 soft, deliberate raps from inside the walk-in freezer. It was slow, spaced out like whoever or whatever was inside had all the time in the world. He hesitated. Logic told him it was someone messing around, maybe a prank or someone locked in by accident. But something about the knocks made the hairs on his neck stand up. Then a voice came from inside, muffled but unmistakably clear. "Help me. It's cold. I'm still in here." It sounded like a child. He stared at the freezer door, every muscle in his body screaming not to move. He thought of Carla's warning, the way she hadn't even blinked when she said it. "Knock. Knock. Knock. Please. I've been here a long time." His hand hovered over the latch. And then he noticed something strange. There was frost forming around the edges of the door, but it was spreading outward, not inward like it should from the cold, but as if something cold was trying to get out. Derek backed away slowly, eyes locked on the door. The knocking stopped. That would have been enough to scare anyone, but things only got worse. The next night, aisle 9, which always had that strange smell, was pitch dark, even though every other aisle was lit. The store's lights didn't even touch it. Like the shadows were thicker there, swallowing the light. He avoided it, but the scent lingered in the air, something metallic, almost like blood. Around 3 a.m., he checked the security monitors in the back office. That's when he saw something he couldn't explain. On camera 4, which pointed straight down aisle 9, there was a figure standing motionless. It wasn't one of the employees. It wasn't a customer. It wasn't even human. It was tall, hunched, and its limbs were too long, its fingers dragging along the floor. Its head was tilted to the side as if it had heard something or sensed him watching. He blinked. The figure was gone. Seconds later, a soft scraping sound echoed from the front of the store. Aisle 9. Something moving. Derek didn't wait to see what it was. He ran out of the back office, past the registers, straight out the automatic doors, which didn't open fast enough. He had to slam his shoulder into them, glass bending just enough to let him through. He didn't look back until he reached his car. The market stood silently behind him, bathed in the orange glow of the parking lot lights. But just as he turned the key in the ignition, he saw it. In the front window, past the rows of candy and impulse buys, there was a face. Watching him, smiling. He never went back, didn't even pick up his last paycheck. But sometimes, late at night, his phone rings once. No number, no voicemail, just a notification from a grocery store app he swears he never downloaded. Your frozen item is ready for pickup.